Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So this is kind of a random bonus video for you guys today because I read a book, and I'll get to that here in a minute. I read a book yesterday that just really kind of brought some things together for me that I've been reflecting on during March Mystery Madness, which, if you don't know, I'm one of the co-hosts of a big kind of like read-a-thon of mystery books in the month of March. And I've been reading a lot of mystery this month in a much more concentrated fashion than I normally would, and thinking about it more purposefully because of that. And as a result of that, I've kind of been mulling over what I'm gonna call the ethics of being a mystery reader. And I'm sure that there's plenty, I've heard people reference this before, so there's a lot of thoughts out there about this, but it really struck an emotional chord for me this month, and I'm gonna try not to get emotional during this because if you don't know, it takes nothing for me to cry. A touching commercial, I'm done. So, and this is some of this is some heavy shit. So if I tear up, please don't be uncomfortable because I'm fine with crying, and emotions are your friend. It's not a big deal. So anyway, I just want to kind of talk about complicity as a mystery reader and what that says. Am I being complicit in sort of a culture of violence and a culture of death? So anyway, it's a little serious. I hope you guys will stick with me. So first, I should just say that I read a lot of mystery. I don't think I realized how much mystery I read until I got on BookTube and people were like, "Oh, Mara at Books Like Whoa really likes to read mystery," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I kind of do." I just hadn't thought about it, and it's true. I do actually, especially in the last year or two, I've gotten more into reading mystery again because I've been doing Project Poirot and because I've gotten into the In Death series by Robb. I've just ended up reading a lot more mystery than I had been the few years prior to that. But I've always been a mystery reader and I really enjoy them, and I really, even if it's not the genre mystery, I like mystery plots even in something like literary fiction. I just think that it is a good engine for a plot. It's a good engine for a story, because it gives you as the reader kind of a puzzle and something that you can kind of hold on to no matter what else is happening, that you're kind of trying to work out and solve. And I really enjoy the puzzle aspect of it. But one thing that I guess I hadn't really, I made a Know Your Tropes video, so I'd express oh yeah, I do tend to kind of cozier mysteries or less graphic, less gory mysteries. I'm not somebody who reads really graphic thrillers that often, for instance. So I kind of knew that that was my taste, and in this month I have been trying to get through particularly the physical books on my TBR that were mysteries, but I kind of went through and looked and was okay, if this is a month about mystery, let's try to get through some of these books that you've said you wanted to read. And so I was doing that, and it was forcing me, because some of the things that I happen to have on my TBR were a little bit out of my comfort zone. And some of the challenges for March Mystery Madness are designed to kind of push you a little bit out of your comfort zone. And I think what the question that started sort of ringing in my head was, does reading the lighter end of mystery insulate me from the reality of what I'm reading? And what I mean by that is, okay, Hercule Poirot books, there are deaths. There are plenty of deaths. Usually, you always have at least one, right? Duh. But usually you end up with 2, 3, 4, 5. You end up with a body count. And it's always described in a very kind of somewhat detached way. You're not gonna get loving descriptions in Agatha Christie of the way that somebody's blood coagulated or something. That's not her thing. She might even say the coagulated blood, but she's not going to dwell on it. And that tends to be how I like my mysteries, where maybe terrible things are happening, but it's not dwelt on. And I guess what I started to kind of think about was, is that ethical? Because what is being described is something really horrifying, and it's being described for my entertainment. And I kind of just started to feel like, am I insulating myself against the reality of what this story is talking about? Because it's not something usually that I really like have to confront and wrestle with in the mysteries that I read. Usually I don't have to really like, I don't usually get emotional. And I was telling you at the top of this, like, it's not hard for me to get emotional, and I don't usually in mysteries. And I kind of just started reflecting on that and thinking, okay, is that good? Like, is that okay? Is that, I mean, the word I keep coming back to is ethical. And I'm just talking about for me, by the way. I'm not like, I may make a couple of broader statements, but in general, I'm just talking about for me. So I kind of started thinking about that. And then 2 books I read this month and 1 podcast I started listening to, were really confrontational to me and really kind of pushed us to the fore and like was making, like has made me emotional. And the 2 books were, one was Imitation and Death by J.D. Robb. It's another installment in her In Death series. And the other is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. Now, I will talk about both of those in my wrap up, so like you'll get my full thoughts. And I'm also going to do a yay or nay review on I'll Be Gone in the Dark because I want more people to read it. So I'll also do that. But basically, the reason that these 2 books really, like, both of them made me cry, like really made me cry. And I think it was because it made me reflect on the degree to which we can glamorize death as mystery readers, and we can think about it only as a puzzle. And at least I'm speaking for me, it really confronted me that I was detaching my humanity from what I was reading about. And the reason that these 2 books did that, well, in Imitation and Death, so the reason it's called Imitation and Death is because there's a serial killer on the loose in New York City. Our detective is Eve Dallas and she is chasing him, but his MO is that he's copying all of these famous serial killers throughout history. So like the first one is Jack the Ripper, and then he does like the Boston Strangler and Ted Bundy. Like, it's kind of revisiting some of these old like serial killers that we know about. And I think it just really resonated with me, and I'll talk more about this at some point when I do like an in-depth wrap up. But I think one thing, the theme that's throughout these books, but in this book, it just like, it touched me, I think in a way it just hasn't totally before, is that Eve Dallas, she talks about standing for the victim, and there's such an emphasis in all of these books about humanizing the victim and about how there's no such thing as actual justice in a murder. There's no such thing as actual justice because you can never get that life back. And see, I'm getting emotional talking about this. You can never get that life back. And that is like what she talks about again and again. And she's basically saying like, my job is to do what I can, but she is like very conflicted and very tormented about the fact that like there's no such thing as full justice because once a life is lost, you can never undo it. And she's very like, her tone about how people around her are kind of sensationalizing the fact that this is a very like sensational murder. She's like got some very pointed commentary about like, I don't give a fuck about this guy. Like, he is not glamorous. He is not special. He's doing something terrible, and that doesn't make him smart or sexy or whatever. Like, that makes him a piece of shit who I'm gonna put away forever. And in those books, by the way, it's in a future society and there's no death penalty. And there's also some interesting commentary, not in this book, but in general in the series about that. But anyway, so I was kind of like, that book gave me all the feels. It's also a book that made me laugh. Like, I love books where you can have both of those ends. So that was one thing. And then from that, because it reminded me of some of those old serial killers, and I was like, oh yeah, I've heard a lot about this podcast called My Favorite Murder. And if you've never listened to My Favorite Murder, it can sound like kind of a weird thing because it's a comedy show. Like, there's a lot of humor in it, and literally what they're doing every week is each of them tells the story of like a famous either killer or rapist, or sometimes like survival stories of people who like outwitted somebody who was trying to kill them. And again, I say that, and that sounds like a very flippant kind of premise. And I started listening to a few that like had things that were interesting to me in it. And again, I found myself crying because I just felt how much there's something about that podcast where they're able to enter in the place where I think we as mystery readers are, which is some level of fascination with death and the psychology of people who are able to do this to other people. They enter into that psychology, but in a way that never loses sight of the victim, like never. It's always so humane and so compassionate, and like, I'll put the information down here, but there was one episode where actually in an earlier episode they had told the story of this woman who survived somebody trying to kill her, and she actually heard it, and then she comes on and gives her response, and like I was weeping in my kitchen because she basically was just saying like, you talked about me like you were my friend. And see, again, I get emotional about this, and basically like that's what I think is so cool about this particular podcast, is that I think that they manage to indulge that part of us that is fascinated by this, but they do it in a way that never loses sight of the victim and never loses sight of sort of the horror of this. And I think also it kind of engaged me it made me think about like women readers of these types of stories, because like, let's be honest, these sensationalized stories usually involve horrible things happening to women, okay? Like, statistically, actually, men are more likely to be murdered, but women are more likely to be murdered in a way that's, like, horrifying and will make the news. Do you know what I mean? So, like, it also kind of made me wrestle with and engage with why is it that women, because so many mystery readers are women, why are we so fascinated with these stories that are awful and like about other women? And it just sort of like, that sent me into this whole spin about like rape culture and like how we have like, there's some catharsis in acknowledging it and like looking your worst nightmare in the face and being like, okay, this woman got away, or this woman didn't. And I don't know what that is exactly, but like, I'm the survivor, and I never know what the right word is, but like, I've experienced sexual violence, and I am very picky about how I am willing to take that in my media. But in murder mysteries, for some reason, it doesn't bother me. And I think that there's something cathartic about like going through the process of like seeing something terrible happen, and either the woman like survives it and like moves on, or doesn't, but there's somebody who's there and who's gonna like make it right. And rape culture and the patriarchy in general, like most women don't get that. Like the number of people I know who like literally have gone to the police and then like nothing has happened, or nobody believed them, or whatever. Like it's just so pervasive. And I think that there's something cathartic about being able to laugh about it with these women on this podcast and just be like, yeah, it was just some woman saying that this, guy had assaulted her, so of course nobody listened. Like there's something almost cathartic. Like I saw a comedian once, I'll put the link below if I can find it, where she was talking about how, and I'm laughing, but it's awful, but like subconsciously every woman is walking around being like, oh God, like, where's my rape? And then like you're in that situation, like, I dropped my keys in a dark parking lot, here's your rape. Like, and that sounds so dark, I'm sorry, but like, it's almost like you have to enter into the darkness and find a way to laugh about it or find a way to come through it. And I think that by not allowing myself, getting back to reading, by not allowing myself to ever go there, I think I'm actually almost like denying myself part of the emotional catharsis of what reading the genre could do for me, if that makes any sense. So anyway, so I started listening to that podcast, and then I also read this month, the last thing I read for March Mystery Madness is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And this is a true crime memoir? I don't know. I'll talk about it in my review, where she's examining this guy who was never caught. Like you find that out on the first page. Never caught. He raped like 45, 50 women. He killed like 10 or 15 people. I forget. Like he was this prolific serial rapist and murderer called the Golden State Killer. And he was like terrorizing California in the late 70s and early 80s. And it's just it's a great book. Like it's gripping, it's beautifully written. It's interesting in terms of how it's engaging with the genre, because it's a little hard to pin down in terms of what genre it is. And I just, again, her writing was so compassionate to the victims and like brought up so many interesting points about like how this affects victims' lives and like how it affects, because part of his MO is like, well, I don't want to get too graphic in case you don't want to hear about that, but like basically he the way he was doing this was purposefully to psychologically torture the man. Like he was targeting couples and he was like purposely doing things to make them feel very, very powerless and like haunted, and then like physically assaulting the women. The way she kind of engages with those questions, again, I was like, oh, like I'm really, like I was crying, like I was really feeling for these victims. I was feeling for the police officers who like spent decades trying to find this guy and like broke up their marriages. Do you know what I mean? So like, it really got me in the feels. And again, I think I just sort of, all of that, like that, the totality of that experience this month, I think has left me with the question of like, what will it look like? Like, I want to learn from this. Like, what does it look like for me going forward to be more intentional about engaging with the reality of the things that I'm reading fictionalized versions of, if that makes sense? Like, I don't want to just stay in my cozy world, because I think for me, I'm now feeling convicted on one hand. Like, I'm feeling like this is something that I, and again, I don't want to generalize for you, I'm just sharing my experience, I want to learn from, and I want to say like, you know what, I think you are kind of, the entertainment and like spectacle side is a little too heavily weighted in your reading of mysteries. You need to read something that kind of helps you keep your humanity, which is it's a little extreme to say that, but like, something that helps you anchor yourself in the reality of what you are reading. And honestly, I think for me, the number one thing is that I'm going to keep listening to this My Favorite Murder podcast, because that would be a dose every week of like, hey, like, here's the reality. I read fictionalized versions of things like this happening, but like, this actually happens. Sometime, well, maybe don't look this up, but the Beast of Jersey, oh my God, the mask that guy wore is the stuff of nightmares, and I didn't know anything about it, and like just listening to how this person was able to do these rape women and young boys and like for years he was able to do, I think something like 20-30 years he was able to do this on the Isle of Jersey, and I had never heard about him before, but like that shit happens all the time. Do you know what I mean? And so like, if I'm reading fictionalized versions of that, I think for me, I want to anchor myself in the reality of like, okay, you're reading this for entertainment. You're reading this and like getting some catharsis from it, I think, is what I've kind of realized. But like, don't forget that this is an actual thing that happens to people, like sadly and awfully, but this is something that happens. And I think also what I realize is, getting back to that catharsis thing, by occasionally letting myself read things that are a little darker, I do get a kind of emotional release from those that I don't from things that are a little lighter. Like, I don't think that a Poirot book has ever made me cry. I enjoy them. I mean, Agatha Christie is probably my favorite author, but they don't make me cry. Like, that's not the emotional response that I have to those books. And I think what I learned from this was like, yeah, maybe it's okay, everyone, like, you know, keep reading the In Death series. And like, this is something that J.D. Robb is clearly interested in kind of talking about thematically in these books. Like, go there with her. Like, allow yourself to really get into Eve's shoes, and like, because she is so passionate about all these things because of her backstory. And like, really let yourself empathize with her, because I think, and again, just like getting personal, because Eve, this isn't a spoiler, this is in the first book, Eve has a horrible backstory of sexual assault as a child. And I think when I first read this, I didn't want to let myself get emotionally too close to her, because I was like, this is too real for me, basically. And I think what I'm seeing now is like, hey, this is actually an opportunity for sort of like growth, like being in touch with your own reality when you let yourself fully empathize with her as a character and imagine yourself in these situations and how hard it would be to talk to victims of the thing that you went through all the time and like stand up for them and like be justice for them, how hard that would be. I think I'd been keeping myself a little emotionally distant from that part of these books. And I think one thing that I took from this is like, no, like, yes, it will make you cry. Everything makes you cry. So like, don't feel weird about that, and just go for it. Like, just be okay with like saying like, okay, I do personally identify with this piece of what your backstory is, and I'm going to go there with you. Like, okay, JD Robb, you've had like 20 books I think I've read from her so far, something like that, to build up trust with me. And I trust you to take me through this emotional journey and drop me off in someplace safe, because she does do that. And I think that I want to purposefully engage with that piece of what she is doing in those books thematically, because she talks about it a lot, and I think I've just been sort of like not going there. If that makes any sense. Maybe it doesn't, I don't know. So anyway, this was much longer than I thought, and I rambled a lot more than I thought I would, so I apologize for that. But again, I think talking about the ethics of being a mystery reader, at least for me, I think one thing that I am taking from this is that I want to be really deliberate about seeing the victims in the stories that I'm reading, about really going there and having that emotional journey. You know, things like, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this or listened to this, but like the podcast Serial or the documentary Making a Murderer. I think that those are wonderful, like really interesting true crime things. I think the thing that makes me sad about them is that, to me, when I watch those, my number one takeaway is, wow, the real injustice here is that these families, even if these two guys did it, like who knows, because of the way their cases were handled, these victims will never, I don't think, have somebody really stand for them and us say like, yes, like you killed Hae-Min Lee, and this is your punishment for it, and have confidence behind that. Like, that is the real tragedy. And I think bringing that mentality into my mystery reading is something that I really feel convicted to do, and something that I've realized will be good for me as a reader and as a person. But also I think it's just like, for me, the right thing to do is to be more deliberate about that. Okay, so anyway, I've been rambling and I'm sorry. Like, I don't know if any of this made sense. I'll try to edit this together so it's vaguely coherent. Let me know what you think about this. I don't know, maybe I'm gonna be totally alone on this and people will be like, what are you even talking about? I don't know, but these are just my thoughts. Let me know, like, how do you engage with kind of the ethics of being a mystery reader? How do you get really emotionally attached in mysteries to like the victims or to like what has happened to them? Or is that something you kind of hold yourself back from? Like, are you just in it for the puzzle, which is, I admit, kind of where I've been? Just let me know what you think, and like, I don't know, just a response. I would enjoy hearing more people kind of help me puzzle my way through this kind of area of thought. But anyway, I think that will do it for me. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. Hope you're having a great day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!